You do not lose money only when life gets hard. Sometimes you lose it right after life opens a door. This is the invisible loyalty that keeps money from staying. I know that sounds strange, because you may have spent years telling yourself the problem is that you do not want it enough, that you are not disciplined enough, that you keep missing the right moment. But I have seen something quieter happen. The raise appears, and you hesitate. The client accepts your price, and you lower it anyway. Someone offers help, and you immediately think of how to give it back. And the worst part is that you do not always call it fear. You call it being humble. You call it not wanting to change. You call it remembering where you came from. You say, I just don't want money to get to my head, while quietly making sure it never gets comfortable in your hands. You say you want expansion, but when expansion asks you to be seen differently, treated differently, paid differently, something in you reaches for the old room, the old ceiling, the old version of love that only knew how to recognize you while you were struggling. So let me ask you something that may not feel easy to answer. What in you would have to die for money to finally have permission to stay? Not what habit, not what budget mistake, what identity, what excuse, what story, what relationship with being small has become so familiar that receiving more feels like betrayal. Because there is a kind of loyalty you never signed, but you pay for every month, and it does not show up in your bank account. It shows up in the offer you decline, the invoice you underprice, the opportunity you explain away before it can change you. I am not here to shame the part of you that learned to survive with less. I know that part may have protected you when needing too much was dangerous, when wanting more made people call you ungrateful, when standing out meant standing alone. But wanting more was never the problem. The problem is that somewhere along the way, more became linked to losing belonging. And until you see that link clearly, money will keep arriving like a guest you invite in, then quietly escort back to the door. I know what it feels like to work until your body is tired, your mind is noisy, and still look at your life wondering why nothing truly changes. You are doing the hours. You are carrying the weight. You are saying yes when you are already empty. And still, when money begins to move toward you, something in you quietly steps in front of it. You call it timing. You call it responsibility. You call it being realistic. But there is a difference between discernment and retreat. There is a difference between protecting your future and protecting the version of you that people are used to seeing. And maybe that is the part nobody taught you to question. What if the problem was never that you cannot attract more, but that you have learned to feel unsafe when more starts to recognize you? Maybe you have done it in ways that looked harmless from the outside. You received extra money and immediately found a reason to give it away, not because generosity moved through you freely, but because keeping it made you uncomfortable. You quoted a fair price for your work, then lowered it before the other person even pushed back. You were offered a raise, a better role, a better client, a better room to stand in, and instead of receiving it with both hands, you started explaining why it might be too much. Too soon, too complicated, too risky. Maybe you have returned money emotionally before it ever left your account. You bought something you did not need because having extra felt strange. You helped someone who did not ask because being needed felt safer than being stable. You confused financial breathing room with selfishness, and then wondered why you always ended up gasping again. I think of a woman who worked in a small office for years. She was always early, always useful, always the one people trusted when something went wrong, but never the one they promoted first. One afternoon, another company offered her almost twice what she made. Better hours, better benefits, a title that matched what she had already been doing in silence. She sat at her kitchen table, reading the email again and again while her mother watched television in the next room. And instead of feeling only relief, she felt her chest tighten. She imagined telling her family. She imagined the jokes before anyone made them. Look at you now. Don't forget us? You think you're better? Nobody had said those words yet, but she had heard versions of them her whole life. So she replied that the timing was not right. She said she wanted stability. She said she was grateful where she was. But what she protected was not stability. It was belonging. It was the old agreement that said, stay close to struggle, and no one will accuse you of leaving. That is how resistance disguises itself. It rarely walks in announcing, I am here to keep you small. It arrives dressed as maturity. I do not want to be greedy. I should be thankful. I do not want money to change me. And sometimes those sentences are clean. There is real wisdom in patience. There is real dignity in gratitude. There is real intelligence in not chasing every door that opens. But there is also a kind of caution that is not wisdom at all. It is an old defense still managing your present like the past never ended. Before we break that pattern, we have to honor why it existed. For some of us, needing less kept us accepted. Asking for less kept the peace. Wanting less kept us from being judged by the people we loved. The strategy did not fail at first. It worked. It protected something. But now it is asking you to keep paying for safety with the life you came here to expand. Here is the part that changed everything for me. Scarcity is not always a lack of skill, discipline, or ambition. Sometimes it is loyalty wearing the clothes of character. You may have spent years thinking you were simply bad with money, inconsistent with money, afraid of money, or unlucky with money. But what if the pattern is more precise than that? What if you do not lose money as often as you return it? You return it to the old story. You return it to the people who feel safer when you are still reaching. You return it to the version of yourself who learned that wanting too much could cost affection, approval, or peace. And I need you to hear me carefully. This is not an attack on where you came from. This is not a rejection of your family, your past, or the people who survived with less before you. This is the moment where we stop confusing inherited limitation with sacred truth. Because there is a difference between real wisdom and fear disguised as maturity. Real wisdom can look at an opportunity and say, "Not this one," without shrinking. Real wisdom can save money, negotiate carefully, move slowly, ask questions, and still remain open to expansion. But fear disguised as maturity sounds different inside the body. It makes your throat tighten when you are about to name your price. It makes you over-explain when someone wants to pay you well. It makes you feel guilty for resting after earning more, as if stability must always be punished with exhaustion. It tells you that asking for fair compensation means you are becoming arrogant. It tells you that receiving more means someone else will have less. It tells you that if you rise too visibly, the people who knew you in survival will no longer know where to place you. So you keep yourself emotionally affordable. You make yourself easy to understand. You remain close enough to scarcity that nobody has to confront what your growth might awaken in them. This is why the question matters more now than it did at the beginning. What in you would have to die for money to finally have permission to stay? Maybe the part that has to die is the identity of being the one who always rescues everyone. Maybe it is the old pride of never needing anything, even when you are drowning quietly. Maybe it is the excuse that says, "I am just simple," when the truth is you are avoiding being seen at full size. Maybe it is the belief that loyalty means staying emotionally poor enough that no one around you feels abandoned. And here is where I want you to pause, not to think in vague terms, but to look directly at the hidden agreement. Ask yourself, who in your life would become uncomfortable if you earned twice as much this year? Now follow that thread. What do you do today to make sure you never disturb that person's comfort? And then go deeper. Is that protection, or is it an agreement you never reviewed? These questions are not meant to accuse you. They are meant to bring the invisible contract into the light. Because once you see the contract, money stops feeling like a threat to belonging. It stops arriving as proof that you are leaving everyone behind. It becomes a resource, not a betrayal. It becomes oxygen for the life you are responsible for building. And yes, some people may need time to understand the version of you that no longer apologizes for receiving. Some may test you. Some may call your boundaries selfish because they were used to your guilt being available on demand. But that does not mean you are doing something wrong. It means the old arrangement is being interrupted. You are not abandoning your roots by growing beyond the limits that wounded them. You are not dishonoring struggle by refusing to worship it. You are not becoming greedy because you finally let your work be valued without immediately discounting your own worth. The moment you stop returning money to the old story, you begin to notice something quiet and powerful. Prosperity does not require you to become someone else. It requires you to stop betraying the person you were becoming before fear taught you to stay small. Now I want you to breathe for a moment, because seeing the pattern is not the same as punishing yourself for having it. I do not believe we heal by hating the version of us that adapted. I believe we begin to change when we can finally tell the truth without turning it into another reason to feel broken. The part of you that stayed small may have been trying to keep connection. The part of you that undercharged may have been trying to avoid rejection. The part of you that gave too much may have been trying to make sure no one could say you changed. So before you rush to become stronger, quieter, sharper, or more disciplined, let this land gently. You were not foolish for learning the rules of the room that raised you, but you are allowed to outgrow a room that only has space for your survival. When you stop managing that old loyalty, your choices begin to feel different in the body. You still care about people, but you no longer make your bank account prove your love. You still remember where you came from, but you no longer treat struggle like a family name you must carry forever. You still move with discernment, but caution stops being the mask your fear wears when it wants control. This is where prosperity becomes less dramatic and more honest. It is not always a sudden breakthrough, a huge number, a perfect offer, or a life that looks impressive from the outside. Sometimes it is the small, private moment when someone asks your price and you give the real number without apologizing afterward. Sometimes it is receiving the payment and not immediately finding a way to disappear it. Sometimes it is letting yourself be helped without turning the help into a debt of identity. I imagine someone sitting across from a client, hands steady under the table, saying the price that used to get stuck in their throat. Not inflated, not desperate, just fair. The client nods, and the old instinct rises for half a second. Explain it, soften it, discount it, make yourself easier to accept. But this time, they breathe and let the number stand. Nothing explodes. Nobody leaves. The room does not collapse because they stopped negotiating against themselves. And something inside them realizes that being paid well did not make them cruel. It made them honest. That is the first turn. You accept charging more. Then comes the second turn. You accept being seen growing. You stop shrinking your wins before sharing them. You stop laughing off your progress so no one feels challenged by it. You stop making your expansion sound smaller in rooms where people might measure themselves against it. And then comes the third turn, the one that asks for the most tenderness and the most backbone at the same time. You accept that some people may stay behind, and that staying behind is their choice, not your guilt. You can love them without lowering your ceiling. You can honor where you came from without recreating its limits in every decision. You can send money home, help when it is clean, give when it is free, and still refuse to let guilt become the manager of your future. This is not coldness. This is order. This is the moment your life stops being organized around who might be uncomfortable with your becoming. And as that order returns, money no longer has to enter through a side door, hide in your hands, and leave before anyone notices. It can stay because you can stay with yourself while holding it. It can stay because you are no longer asking prosperity to apologize for choosing you. It can stay because the old story is losing its authority, and the new one is finally learning how to speak. The loyalty now has a name. It was never only procrastination, never only bad timing, never only the way life happens to you when you are tired of trying. It was the silent agreement that said, do not rise so high that the people who knew your struggle stop recognizing you. Do not earn so much that your old excuses lose their shelter. Do not become so stable that you can no longer hide behind what happened before. And now that you can see it, you cannot unsee it. The money was not only leaving because of bills, mistakes, emergencies, or lack of discipline. Sometimes it was leaving because a part of you still believed that keeping it would cost you love. And that is the ache underneath the pattern. Not numbers, not strategy, not another lecture about budgeting your way into a different life while your hands are still trembling around receiving. It is the moment you realize you were not only protecting yourself from failure, you were protecting yourself from the consequences of being fully seen. Seen as capable, seen as valuable, seen as someone whose life no longer proves the old story right. Maybe that is why prosperity felt so heavy when it arrived. It did not simply ask you to manage more money. It asked you to stop performing the version of yourself that everyone already understood. It asked you to stop making your life small enough to be approved by people who were never taught how to bless expansion without feeling accused by it. So let the old contract end here, not with hatred, not with drama, not by cutting your heart away from everyone who came before you. Let it end with truth. You can love people without repeating their limits. You can remember hunger without making it your religion. You can be generous without becoming empty. You can be grateful without being underpaid. You can belong to your roots without handing them the authority to decide how far your life is allowed to go. Enough shrinking. Enough apologizing. Enough returning what was finally ready to stay. Enough. No more. Today, you don't need more courage to prosper. You need to stop being loyal to the fear that keeps you small. And if this touched something in you, tell me, because I want to keep building this path with you. Follow me here. Not because you need another voice telling you to want more, but because something in you is finally ready to receive without immediately preparing an apology. Stay close to that part. Protect that part. Let it learn that being paid well does not make you cold, being stable does not make you selfish, and being chosen by a bigger life does not mean you betrayed the smaller one that once kept you alive. When this screen goes quiet, let these words remain in front of you. I am allowed to receive without betraying where I came from. Slowly. Honestly. Now, what are you going to stop protecting, now that you finally know the name of the agreement?